What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another video. In today's video, I'm going to go through everything that you need to know in order to make your crispiest, most refreshing lager styles like this Japanese rice lager that I'm drinking right now. Before we get anywhere in this video, I think what we need to do first is just define what even is crispiness in the context of beer. In my opinion, it's one of the most overused descriptors of beer in general. It's kind of like calling an IPA hoppy, in my opinion, but we need to break down further exactly what is the sensation of crispiness, how does it come into play with a lager, and why is it so desirable? Crispiness is, like I said, it's a sensation. It's a combination of several different factors within the beer that lead to it feeling just super refreshing and thirst-quenching, and especially on a hot day, right? Crispiness outside of beer is described as something like, I don't know, walking outside on a cool fall morning where the air is crispy and it's slightly cold out, and it's sort of, you breathe in and you feel refreshed. It's the same sensation you might also get when you're drinking a glass of ice cold lemonade or, you know, fresh apple juice. These are crispy items. The reason why the fruit juices and the lemonade really come to mind is because they have this thirst-quenching effect, a refreshing effect, but also they are very brightly flavored. And that's really what it comes down to when we're talking about a crisp beer. Light-bodied, dry finishing, refreshing, thirst-quenching, brightly flavored, and generally with like a little bit of an edge on the mouthfeel. Again, I feel like crispiness is kind of overused because people tend to describe every lager as crispy when I think they're trying to say clean. Not every lager should be crisp. In fact, many of them should not be. A German Pils, a Japanese rice lager, these are crisp beers, right? Because of their characteristics. But a Doppelbock, a Czech Dark Lager, a Maibach, those certainly don't need to be crispy. And this is something that I think is an important distinction to make when it comes to the texture of the beer. But that's enough description of what it is. Let's talk about how to achieve it in your beer. All in all, there's nothing that's too particularly difficult to achieve this. So with that in mind, the first thing you might want to do is look into your water profile. One of the easiest ways to achieve a little bit of an element of crispiness is to increase the sulfate to chloride ratio in the water profile, roughly 2:1, without overdoing the amount of minerals in the beer overall. So for example, if you want to shoot for something like the water profile for this beer, which ended up having about 60 parts per million of sulfate to about 30 parts per million of chloride, that gives you that ratio of 2:1. And what that does is it accentuates the edges on the beer, and it also makes the beer finish drier and makes some of the flavors brighter and pop out a little bit more. And that is desirable for a dry finishing lager like this one. I would not do that with a Doppelbock. This is also the same technique that could be used to make a West Coast IPA taste more bitter and more hoppy and more sharp. And that's one element of the crispiness. An easy way to up that sulfate content a little bit is just to add a little bit extra gypsum or Epsom salts into your mash water and make sure that that is nicely dissolved. For light-bodied lagers like this one, I really wouldn't advise making that water profile too heavy on the minerals overall, so just a very light hand on that stuff is important. Yeah, I would recommend looking into the water profiles that I've used for this beer, for a German Pilsner, or for a Helles lager to get the same effect for your beers. Moving on, another component to getting a nice crispy lager is a good dry finish on it. Not every time, but in most cases, if you want the beer to be refreshing and thirst-quenching, a dry finish is preferable. A dry finish in the beer keeps the body of the beer light, but it also reduces the amount of residual sugars, and it adds an effect that when you take a sip, you enjoy the flavor. As soon as you swallow, it's gone, and your palate is left refreshed. This kind of makes it more likely that you're about to take another sip in quick succession. Whereas if you're drinking a very richly flavored, sweet finishing beer, it could stick around for a long time, and you might want to, you know, in certain circumstances that's desirable and you might want to enjoy that. But for something like this Japanese rice lager on a, 100-degree day, it's very refreshing just to have that flavor be there for an instant and be gone. An increased sulfate to chloride ratio will increase the sensation of a dry finish on the beer, but that's not the whole picture. A very important component to getting a dry finish is a good level of attenuation in the beer. That is how much of the sugar is consumed by the yeast and how much is left over. High attenuation means most of that sugar has been converted into alcohol and there's a very small amount of residual sugars left over. And a big component to that, of course, is your mash temperature. Sure, you could do a little bit lower of a mash temperature to encourage higher attenuation, but a much more overlooked component to it is actually yeast selection. So the world's most common lager strain out there, one of the most easy to get a hold of, it's also dry yeast, Saftlager W3470, the Weihenstephaner 3470 strain, is one of the prime examples of a great dry finishing, super refreshing yeast that has a high level of attenuation. It'll chew through some more of those complex sugars relative to something like a Munich lager yeast, or a Southern German lager yeast or a Czech lager yeast. And this can get you that crisping effect that you're looking for after some time in the keg. Of course, there's a million other lager strains out there. Many of them are just as attenuative as W3470. Another option that's not a lager strain though, and that would absolutely do just as well, is something like Lagering. As a pseudo lager strain, it's going to get the job done at higher temperatures. I have plenty of content going over this. Norwegian Kveiks in general are extremely attenuative yeasts, and they will chew through complex sugars a lot more so readily than a lager yeast will. So that's another option to get you a nice dry finish on your beer. Just make sure you're balancing your mash temperatures in accordance with that to make a good balanced finishing product. Another technique that you can use to help accentuate the crispness is to pay attention to the beer's finishing pH. If you look back at my previous examples of apple juice and lemonade being crispy drinks, those have crispy effects for another reason too, and that's pH. So one of the things that you might want to pay attention to if you're trying to make a crisp finishing beer is the pH as well. pH is a often kind of debated topic within home brewing. I've tended to kind of stop measuring my mash pH, but what I will do is try to make sure that my final beer pH is in the right area. Generally, for a lager like this one, the final beer pH can be anywhere from about 3.9 to 4.2, whereas equivalent ales can go a little bit higher than 4.2. And the effect of this is very interesting because a lower beer pH within that region will give you brighter, more expressive flavors that also have an effect on the body of the beer, making it feel kind of lighter. In the opposite direction, if you go higher in that range, you get a little bit more richer, fuller flavors, but less of that brighter kind of citrusy character. And that is one of the things that is going to affect whether or not your beer feels crispy at the end of the day. Obviously, it's not a bad idea to pay attention to pH throughout the entire process, but where it really matters is where does the beer end? And so if it's on that lower end of the spectrum, you might be looking at much more of a crispy character in your beer, just with reduced malty flavors and, a little bit of an acidic twang if you take it too far. I would advise against that, but it's up to you. One of the easiest things to do in the moment is just adding a couple milliliters of lactic acid into your keg or your fermenter if the pH is too high, just to bring it down a little bit and get you that nice crisping effect. I wouldn't recommend, again, going lower than 3.9 unless you're really trying to target something that's a bit more acidic in general. And keep in mind also there is a flavor threshold with lactic acid that shows up around roughly 3 or 4 milliliters added to a 5-gallon keg. So keeping all that in mind, pH is still an important component of a crisp beer. Another thing you could do is utilize some adjunct grains in your recipe. Certain grains are going to have certain effects. I wouldn't add oats, I wouldn't add wheat into this. Those adjuncts make the beer fuller, but things like rice or corn are going to help dry the beer out, thin it out a little bit, and add to that crisping effect. You can also use a simple sugar like dextrose to get a similar effect as well. This is one of the reasons why American lagers often have rice and corn in them. Why this Japanese rice lager obviously has rice in it. Also, Mexican lagers have corn in them pretty frequently as well. If you're not bound by the Reinheitsgebot to brew an all barley malt beer, then this is certainly an easy way to increase the crispness and the lightness of your beer. From the recipe standpoint, one other thing that's going to help increase the crispness levels is an appropriate level of bitterness. I say appropriate because this is going to flex depending on your palate, depending on the beer style. An appropriate level of bitterness for this Japanese rice lager is going to be very different than the appropriate level of bitterness for a German Pilsner. Slightly more bitter beers tend to feel a bit crisper on the palate, especially after they've lagered for some time. A useful tool to kind of figure this out for yourself is the BU to GU ratio in a recipe, or the IBUs to OG gravity points ratio. This is one of the easiest ways to kind of get an idea of just how bitter your beer is going to be. Side note, IBUs are kind of like a made-up thing anyway. They're not really all that useful in terms of a unit of measurement. 70 IBUs in one beer does not mean the same amount of bitterness as 70 IBUs in another beer, or 70 IBUs from one hop means a very different level of perceivable bitterness than 70 IBUs from another hop. The point I'm getting at is you can make a 70 IBU beer that's got an OG of 1090. That's gonna be not all that bitter, all things considered. If you made a 70 IBU beer that's got an OG of 1045 though, that's gonna be really bitter. The BU to GU ratio, therefore, is a good tool to use to kind of figure out how you get a little bit of bitterness in there. If you want the crispiness character that we're after here, getting that ratio to somewhere around like 0.5 to 0.6, that generally is kind of what you're gonna shoot for. For example, this Japanese rice lager has 20 IBUs of bitterness in it, and the OG was about 1042. Which is, it's not bitter, but it's still snappy and refreshing, and the hops do pop out really nicely. Another thing, side note to consider, is that if you got the citrusy kind of hops, or you got hops that pop out lemon, like Sots, for example, that's going to really aid in the essential kind of elements of crispiness. Citrus-forward, lighter, brighter flavors like that do tend to emphasize crispiness in the final beer. And the last piece of it that's related to process is one that's pretty important here. I'm gonna be a stick in the mud about this, even though it's probably not really fully necessary, but that's just who I am. Lagering time matters. I'm gonna say a couple things to preface this. Number one, you can drink a young lager and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's why Keller beer is a thing. They're fantastic and they have a really nice component of flavor to them, but they're not gonna be crispy. So don't call a young, cloudy lager crispy. It might be clean, but it's not crispy. Number two, we live in a world nowadays where we can add finings to the beer, we can filter out the beer, we can do everything to make it look clear and clean like this, and that's awesome. I do that all the time. But there is still a component to the mouthfeel that changes when you let it sit and lager for a long time. You can get 90% of the way there with finings, filtering, everything that you need to do to get it to look clear, but there still is something magical that happens when it sits in the keg for a very long time. And that really leads me to my third point here, is like lagering really just refers to cold storage over a long period of time. You don't have to keep it in the fermenter. You can lager it in the keg, and that's actually what I recommend doing. I have done that as my standard process now for many years. Just put it in the keg as soon as it's finished the fermentation, as it's cloudy, as it's like not really fully there yet. Put it in the back of your kegerator and let it sit there and don't touch it for a little while. If you want to hook it up to gas, totally fine. If you want to hook it up and serve it, like totally fine. You do you. In fact, many times I do that anyway. Odds are though, the last several pours of that keg, before it starts to suck up all the junk on the bottom of the keg, are going to be some of the finest, most crisp and clean and light-bodied beers you pour out of that keg. Something changes magically over the several weeks that it sits in cold temperatures, even if you find it, even if you filtered it and done everything to make it look like it's fully lagered. It's still something that makes a big difference for me, and when it comes to crispness, this is, in my opinion, the number one thing that will make a big difference for the actual sensation of crispiness in the beer. Again, this is all my opinion. I'm a stick in the mud about some of these things, but that's one thing that I really do feel in my personal experience has been very impactful. And then the final thing that makes a big difference for how the beer is perceived to be crisp and refreshing is honestly one of the easiest, and that is serving it as cold as you can get it, especially for a lighter lager like this one. One of the big components to a crisp, refreshing character is just getting a nice cold beer on a hot day. The other day when it was over 100 degrees outside, over 38 degrees Celsius, I took this Japanese rice lager, 5% alcohol, pouring out of a kegerator at 35 degrees or about 3 degrees Celsius. And let me tell you, there is nothing that cuts through the heat better and nothing that refreshes you better than a nice cold beer on a very hot day. Now, of course, with this being a light flavored beer with adjunct grains, that sort of makes sense to serve it super cold. That's what you do. But it does really aid in that sensation. So if you want to make your crispiest, snappiest, most refreshing lager, you do all of those things in combination, you're going to end up with a pretty great result, in my opinion. If you do so, let me know how that turns out for you. Also, in your experience, if you have any tips or tricks about how to make crispy lagers, then go ahead and drop those in the comment section down below as well, especially if I didn't mention them in this video, because I probably missed one or two things here or there. So if you enjoyed this video, you found it useful, you learned something, you just generally remotely enjoyed it, just go ahead, let me know by hitting that like button, and don't forget to comment down below as well. And also double check, make sure you're subscribed. If you haven't subscribed already, that subscribe button is right down below the video, and it means a lot to me. If you want to support the channel, please consider picking up a t-shirt like this one. You can find this design and plenty of others in my merchandise store, which is linked in the description box down below the video, where you can find plenty of other designs and some glassware as well. I also have a Patreon, and my patrons are really the #1 financial supporter for this channel. You guys are helping me be able to crank out content on a little bit more of a regular basis now. You are helping me keep going, as this is a difficult job right now with a family and, you know, full-time jobs and all that. So thank you for your support. It means more to me than I think you guys really know. If Patreon's not your thing though, I do have channel memberships, and there's the super thanks button. Both are quick and easy ways to help support me as well. And again, just like Patreon, this all goes right back into the channel. There's also an Amazon store where you can find my channel production equipment, as well as the brewing equipment that's available on Amazon that I regularly use and vouch for. It's all in that store if you're curious. I'm also available on social media as the Apartment Brewer. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook, so check those links out for some more frequent content besides YouTube. You get to see what's coming to the channel and just kind of see what's going on in the rest of my life. And last but certainly not least, if you're still watching at this point, thank you very much for still sticking around. It means a lot to me. It means you got something out of it and learned something and enjoyed your time here, and that's really what I'm after. So until the next one, this goes out to you. Cheers.